In the hills of northern China, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a city so large, so fortified, and so far ahead of its time that it forced historians to rewrite the opening chapter of Chinese civilization. Before going further, a quick, honest note on the framing of this story as it's circulated online. There's no verified quantum computer reconstruction behind what's actually known about this site, and it's worth being direct about why that claim doesn't hold up technically. Quantum computers are specialized machines built for a narrow category of mathematical problems, things like simulating molecular behavior or certain optimization calculations. Reconstructing an ancient city from excavated remains is a job for 3D modeling, photogrammetry, and conventional computational analysis, the same kind of digital archaeology tools that have genuinely and impressively been used at sites around the world in recent years. That distinction matters, but it doesn't make this story any less remarkable. If anything, the real archaeology here is stranger and more genuinely mysterious than anything a fabricated quantum computing angle could add to it. The city is called Shimao, and until fairly recently, most of the world, including most archaeologists working outside China, had never heard of it. Shimao sits in Shanxi province, in northern China, near the edge of the Loess Plateau, close to the Muus Desert. Its remains had actually been known to local researchers for decades, with jade artifacts from the site surfacing as far back as the 1920s and 1930s, but the true scale of what was buried there wasn't properly understood until systematic excavation began in earnest starting around 2011. What archaeologists found once they started digging seriously reshaped a significant part of the accepted narrative about how and where Chinese civilization actually began. The broader region and time period Shimao belongs to is itself worth understanding, because it helps explain why this discovery landed with such force among specialists. Shimao emerged during what archaeologists generally refer to as the Longshan period, roughly the 3rd millennium BCE, an era across many parts of what's now China marked by the appearance of increasingly large, fortified settlements, more pronounced social stratification visible in burial practices and material wealth, and specialized craft production, all signs of societies moving toward greater political complexity ahead of the emergence of China's earliest recognized dynasties. Other significant Longshan-era sites have been identified in various regions, including along parts of the Yellow River and in the lower Yangtze Basin, each showing its own distinct combination of architecture, material culture, and scale. What makes Shimao stand out even within this broader, already significant period is simply its size and the sophistication of its fortifications, which dwarf most other contemporaneous sites found so far. Situated, moreover, in a northern, semi-arid region that traditional historical narratives had rarely treated as a plausible center of major early political power. The environment surrounding Shimao also tells its own part of the story. The Loess Plateau, where the city was built, is defined by thick deposits of wind-blown silt called loess, a fertile but erosion-prone soil that has shaped both the region's agricultural potential and its long history of dramatic landscape change. During the period Shimao flourished, the regional climate appears to have been somewhat wetter and more agriculturally productive than it is today, conditions that would have made supporting a large, densely populated urban center considerably more feasible than the area's more arid modern climate might initially suggest. Understanding these ancient environmental conditions has become an important part of ongoing research at the site, since shifts in climate and available agricultural resources are widely considered among the leading candidate explanations for why such a major settlement eventually went into decline. The site is enormous. Shimao's fortified core spans an area covering roughly 400 hectares, making it one of the largest walled settlements found anywhere in the prehistoric world, comparable in scale to major early urban centers found in other parts of the ancient world during the same broad era. The city was surrounded by massive stone walls, built using a sophisticated dry stone construction technique, with sections still standing tall enough today that their sheer scale is immediately obvious to anyone standing next to them. Radiocarbon dating places the site's main period of construction and use at roughly 2300 to 1800 BCE, meaning Shimao was already a major, fully functioning fortified city during a period that predates, or at minimum overlaps with, the traditionally accepted founding period of the Xia dynasty, generally considered the first dynasty in Chinese historical tradition, and one whose very historicity scholars have debated for over a century due to the scarcity of confirmed archaeological or textual evidence directly tied to it. That timing is exactly why Shimao matters so much to historians rethinking the story of early Chinese civilization. For most of the 20th century, the dominant scholarly framework held that Chinese civilization essentially began in a single core region, the Central Plains along the middle and lower Yellow River, with more distant regions treated as peripheral, less developed areas that gradually receive civilization outward from that central heartland. Shimao complicates that picture considerably. Here was a genuinely massive, heavily fortified, clearly sophisticated urban center, located well outside that traditionally assumed central heartland. Apparently thriving with a level of organizational complexity, monumental architecture, and clear social stratification that the older model simply didn't anticipate finding in that specific region during that specific era. It's part of a broader ongoing shift in Chinese archaeology over the last few decades, moving away from a single origin model of civilization and toward a picture of multiple, regionally distinct centers of complex society developing somewhat independently across a wide area of what's now China, each contributing in different ways to what eventually became a shared, interconnected civilization. The architecture at Shimao is genuinely remarkable on its own terms, independent of any broader historical debate. At the heart of the fortified city sits a massive step structure, often compared informally to a pyramid, though its actual form and function differ meaningfully from Egyptian or Mesoamerican pyramids. This central structure, sometimes referred to by archaeologists using the Chinese name Huangchengtai, meaning something like Imperial City Platform, rises in a series of terraced levels, built from rammed earth and reinforced with stone retaining walls, and appears to have functioned as the elite, ceremonial, and administrative core of the entire settlement, the place where the city's ruling class most likely lived and where its most significant ritual activity took place. Excavations at this central platform have uncovered painted wall fragments showing geometric patterns and stylized designs, evidence of genuinely skilled artistic and decorative work, along with workshop areas where craftspeople produced painted pottery, bone tools, and other goods. The engineering behind Shimao's outer defensive walls deserves its own attention, because it represents a genuinely sophisticated construction achievement for its era. The walls were built primarily using dry stone masonry, meaning stones were carefully cut, shaped, and fitted together without mortar, relying on precise placement and the sheer weight and friction of the stones themselves to hold the structure together, a technique requiring considerable skill, planning, and an organized workforce familiar with quarrying and transporting large quantities of stone. In some sections, the walls incorporate bastion-like projecting structures at intervals along their length, a defensive architectural feature that would have allowed defenders positioned there to see and defend the base of the wall itself, a design principle that shows up independently in fortification systems built by various other ancient and later civilizations around the world, evidence of a genuinely thoughtful, deliberate approach to defensive architecture rather than a simple, unplanned barrier. Some sections of wall still standing today collapse, and burial reduced them to their current state, meaning the fortifications archaeologists first encountered represent only a partial remnant of what was once an even more imposing structure. Beyond the central platform and outer walls, excavations have identified a genuinely complex internal layout across the wider settlement, including what appear to be distinct residential zones, separate workshop areas dedicated to different kinds of craft production, and evidence suggesting a broader, layered urban organization rather than a simple, undifferentiated settlement. This kind of internal zoning, distinct areas dedicated to different social functions and likely different social classes, is exactly the sort of evidence archaeologists look for when assessing how genuinely urbanized and socially stratified an ancient settlement actually was, and Shimao's layout shows real, meaningful complexity along these lines, further reinforcing the picture of a settlement functioning as a genuine political and administrative center, rather than simply an oversized fortified village. One of the most striking and genuinely puzzling discoveries at Shimao involves jade. Archaeologists have found numerous jade blades and other jade artifacts deliberately embedded directly within the stone walls of the city itself, placed into the wall structure during construction rather than simply stored or displayed elsewhere. This is a genuinely unusual practice, and its exact purpose remains a matter of ongoing scholarly debate. Some researchers propose these embedded jade pieces served a ritual or protective function, perhaps intended to spiritually reinforce or sanctify the city's defensive walls. Others suggest a more practical or symbolic display of wealth and power, demonstrating the resources and authority of whoever controlled the city by literally building precious material into its most visible defensive structures. Jade held deep cultural and ritual significance across numerous early Chinese cultures for thousands of years, and its deliberate incorporation into Shimao's walls fits into that broader pattern of jade as a marker of status, ritual power, and elite identity, even if the specific reasoning behind this particular architectural choice remains unresolved. Perhaps the most unsettling discovery at the site involves what archaeologists found near several of the city's gates. Pits containing dozens of human skulls, arranged in clusters, generally interpreted by researchers as evidence of ritual human sacrifice connected either to the initial construction of the city's defenses or to some other significant ceremonial or political event in the settlement's history. Analysis of the remains has suggested the individuals were relatively young, predominantly female in at least some of the excavated pits, and the specific circumstances and full cultural meaning behind these sacrifices remain genuinely unclear and actively studied. Human sacrifice tied to the construction of major architectural or defensive projects is a practice documented at various points across multiple ancient cultures around the world. And while its presence at Shimao is a genuinely significant and grim archaeological finding, it fits within a broader, well-documented pattern of how some ancient societies marked the construction of major monuments or fortifications with ritual violence, often as a demonstration of the ruling authority's power over life and death, or as an offering intended to secure protection or legitimacy for the new structure. So who actually ruled this remarkable, clearly powerful, and clearly wealthy city? Here's the honest, genuinely important answer. Nobody knows for certain. That uncertainty is a real, actively debated open question in the field, not a solved mystery being withheld from public attention. No confirmed writing system has been found at Shimao. This is a significant point because it means there are no king lists, no royal inscriptions, no administrative records identifying specific rulers, dynasties, or even names connected to the site, the kind of textual evidence that has allowed historians to reconstruct detailed political histories for other early civilizations, like ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia, where extensive writing systems developed early and survive in the archaeological record. Everything we know about Shimao's social and political organization has to be inferred entirely from physical, material evidence, the scale and sophistication of its architecture, the clear differences in wealth and status visible between different areas of the settlement, the specialized workshops indicating organized craft production, and the sheer scale of labor and resource coordination that construction on this level would have required. That inferred picture does tell us something meaningful, even without names or written records. A city of this scale, with monumental fortifications, a clearly defined elite ceremonial center, evidence of specialized craft production, ritual sacrifice connected to construction, and jade objects signaling both wealth and ritual authority, strongly suggests a genuinely hierarchical society with a centralized ruling authority capable of organizing and directing enormous amounts of coordinated labor. Building walls on the scale found at Shimao would have required sustained, large-scale mobilization of workers over an extended period. Exactly the kind of project that historians generally associate with a powerful, centralized political authority, capable of commanding significant human and material resources. What remains genuinely unresolved is how Shimao's rulers and its broader political structure relate to the other major cultural and political developments happening across China during roughly the same era. Some scholars have proposed possible connections between Shimao and figures or events referenced in later, much younger Chinese historical and legendary traditions, since some ancient Chinese texts, compiled centuries after Shimao's decline, describe conflicts and political developments in the broader region during a roughly comparable era. But it's important to be genuinely careful and honest here because these proposed connections remain speculative rather than confirmed. Chinese historical traditions concerning this early period were compiled long after the events they describe, drawing on oral tradition and earlier, now lost written sources, and matching a specific archaeological site with zero surviving contemporary written records to a specific named figure or event from a much later textual tradition is a genuinely difficult, uncertain undertaking that responsible archaeologists and historians approach with considerable caution rather than confident, headline-ready certainty. Material evidence recovered from the site does at least offer some genuine clues about Shimao's broader connections and influence, even without solving the question of who specifically ruled there. Some of the artistic motifs found carved and painted at Shimao, along with certain jade artifact styles, show intriguing similarities to material culture found at sites considerably further away, in some cases stretching toward other significant Longshan-era centers hundreds of kilometers distant. This kind of shared stylistic vocabulary across such a wide geographic distance suggests Shimao wasn't an isolated outpost, but rather an active participant in wider networks of trade, cultural exchange, and quite possibly political or diplomatic contact stretching across a considerable portion of what's now northern and central China. Some researchers have proposed that Shimao may have functioned as an important node along early trade or exchange routes connecting different regional cultures, a role its position near the edge of the Low S Plateau at something of a crossroads between different ecological and cultural zones would have made geographically plausible. This broader web of connections is itself an active area of ongoing research, with each new excavation season adding incrementally to a still developing picture of exactly how interconnected these different early Chinese regional centers actually were with one another. What's clearer, and genuinely well supported by the archaeological evidence itself, is that Shimao appears to have gone into decline and was eventually abandoned sometime after around 1800 BCE, roughly coinciding with broader shifts happening across the region during this period, including climate change affecting the Low S Plateau's environment and agricultural productivity, and the eventual rise of new centers of political power elsewhere, including in the traditionally recognized heartland of early Chinese civilization along the Yellow River. Whether Shimao's decline reflects internal political collapse, environmental pressure, conflict with rival groups, or some combination of these and other factors researchers haven't yet fully identified, remains an active area of ongoing investigation. This is genuinely where modern computational and digital archaeology tools have made a real, legitimate contribution to understanding the site, even without any exaggerated quantum computing framing attached to it. Researchers working at Shimao and comparable sites have used real, well-established technology, including drone-based aerial photography, photogrammetry, which builds detailed three-dimensional models from large sets of overlapping photographs, and geographic information system mapping, to document the site's massive scale and complex layout with a level of precision that would have been extremely difficult and time-consuming using purely traditional survey methods. These tools have helped archaeologists map the full extent of Shimao's walls, terraces, and structures, generate detailed digital reconstructions of what the city's layout and monumental core likely looked like at its peak, and coordinate the enormous ongoing task of excavating and documenting a site of this scale, work that remains far from complete even now, well over a decade after serious excavation began. It's worth being specific about why these particular digital tools genuinely matter for a site the size of Shimao, beyond simply being convenient. A fortified settlement covering roughly 400 hectares represents an enormous area for archaeologists to survey, document, and analyze using traditional measuring and mapping techniques alone, work that could realistically take many additional years using only older manual survey methods. Photogrammetry and drone-based mapping allow researchers to capture highly detailed, accurately scaled documentation of large excavated areas in a fraction of the time traditional methods would require, while also creating a permanent, precise digital record of each excavation area exactly as it appeared at the time of documentation. An important consideration since excavation is, by nature, a partially destructive process that changes a site permanently as work progresses. These digital models also allow researchers around the world to study and analyze Shimao's layout and architecture without needing to physically travel to the remote site itself, genuinely expanding the pool of specialists able to meaningfully contribute to understanding what continues to be uncovered there. It's worth putting Shimao's genuine significance in proper context because it doesn't need any exaggeration to be a legitimately major archaeological story. Its rediscovery and proper excavation represents one of the most significant developments in the study of early Chinese civilization in recent decades, forcing a real, substantive reconsideration of where, when, and how complex, urbanized society first emerged across the region that would eventually become China. It stands as physical evidence that sophisticated large-scale political organization, monumental architecture, and organized ritual practice were developing in multiple, geographically separate regions during this early period, rather than radiating outward from one single point of origin the way earlier generations of scholars had generally assumed. And the central mystery at its heart, who actually built and ruled this remarkable city, whose names, dynasty, or specific political identity remain entirely unknown to us, isn't a gap waiting for a dramatic AI-powered reveal. It's a genuine, open historical question, the kind that gets addressed slowly and carefully, one excavation season at a time, through exactly the patient, rigorous archaeological work that's been ongoing at the site for well over a decade now, with a great deal of the settlement still unexcavated and a great deal more likely still waiting to be found and understood. That unresolved mystery is, honestly, part of what makes Shimao such a genuinely compelling site to follow closely in the years ahead. Unlike a story built around a fabricated technological reveal, promising a tidy, the real ongoing story of Shimao is one where the next major discovery could genuinely still be sitting in the ground, waiting for the next excavation season, the next research team, or the next unexpected artifact to shift the picture again, the same way the last decade of work at this site already has, more than once. If getting the honest, carefully sourced version of ancient mysteries that are still genuinely being solved, rather than a fabricated resolution slapped onto a real discovery, is what you're here for, subscribe, because Shimao is still being excavated right now, and whatever comes out of the ground next could change this story all over again.